According to an article in the Wall Street Journal, Wells Fargo is losing $10 million a month on the Bilt credit card. You don't have to have a business degree to know that does not sound good. Not too long ago, I reviewed the Bilt credit card from the view of a non-renter like myself. But in today's video, I'm going to bring you up to speed on this $10 million number because it's really important for us to understand. And we're going to talk about what's the potential impact to us short and long term, whether you're a renter or a non-renter. Now be sure to stay to the end because I'm going to give you my final thoughts and recommendations of what to consider for Bilt and beyond Bilt. And most importantly, is Bilt still for the non-renter? And at this point, even the renter. So let's get started. Bilt is widely known as the only credit card that allows you to pay your rent without having to pay that typical processing fee, which even Bilt shows on their website as 3%. Now that's a cost that can quickly add up, and we all knew that Wells Fargo was taking a loss for that. Now acquiring new customers for a bank is always a high cost, and especially if you're starting a new credit card, there's a lot of times where you may have an initial loss. But the problem is that this $10 million number we're seeing is not specifically related to that situation. In 2022, Wells Fargo got a new CEO, and one of the major focus of the bank was to expand their credit card business. Now in that same year, Wells Fargo ended up partnering with Bilt. Now many of you all may have thought that Bilt was just the name on the credit card, but it actually is a partnership between Wells Fargo and Bilt. The fact that this is a partnership is one of the major issues related to this Wells Fargo situation. So how in the heck do you lose $10 million a month? Well, it actually comes down to 5 things. Number 1, Wells Fargo is picking up the cost of that processing fee for rent. And as I mentioned earlier, Bilt is showing that at 3%. So if you're talking about a $2,000 rent payment, that 3% cost to Wells Fargo is $60 a transaction. The second item is that Wells Fargo is also paying 0.8% on each rental transaction to Bilt. Now that 0.8% rental transaction fee is being paid to Bilt to help pay for those rewards that you and I receive. The third reason is that Wells Fargo pays Bilt $200 for each new account opening. Now we've already heard that within the first 18 months that there had been 1 million account openings. So that would represent a $200 million expense to Wells Fargo. Now while this is actually a pretty common practice from what we understand, it still represents a significant expense. Number 4 is that Wells Fargo projected that 65% of their total purchase volume on the Bilt credit card would be for non-rent. And that revenue was going to help with the processing fees that we talked about at that 3%. But the reality appears to be that it is probably closer to 35% is non-rent versus the 65% they projected. And the 5th reason is that Wells Fargo projected that 50 to 75% of all of the charges on Bilt would roll over month, which would generate them interest. But the reality actually appears that that number is probably closer to 15 to 25%. So let's take a look at those projections that Wells Fargo made that were ambitious at best and a fantasy at worst. The first projection was that 65% of all purchase volume would be non-rent. The multipliers are mediocre at best unless it's rent day, and they're also requiring you to make 5 minimum transactions per month, which clearly shows they were concerned about non-rental activity. And you have to wonder, why would they think that the purchase volume would be 65% non-rent? Now the second projection of 50 to 75% carryover month to over month is actually even more perplexing. Our home is the largest and most important expense that we have. And I don't know about you, but I'll rob Peter to pay Paul to make sure that my payment is made on time every time. So there would be no reason for most people to not at least pay that rental payment every single month on time and not carry that balance over. Now couple that fact with the reasons I mentioned in the other projection, and that projection from Wells Fargo really seems strange. The Wall Street Journal is also reporting that Wells Fargo wants to renegotiate the existing contract with Bilt to address these financial situations. But of course, Bilt doesn't feel that a renegotiation is really necessary. It is also being reported that if Wells Fargo is unable to renegotiate this contract, to address these financial situations that it will not be interested in continuing when the contract ends in 2029. So if Wells Fargo is able to renegotiate, what are the areas that they're going to most likely try to look at to address these financial shortfalls? And what is the impact to renters and non-renters? Well, let's start looking at the first two options that don't have a direct impact on us as cardholders. The first item would be a potential reduction in the $200 fee that Wells Fargo pays to Bilt for every new account. And this is probably the least attractive for Wells Fargo because it doesn't really represent an immediate impact, and more importantly is that it only represents a one-time savings per account. The second item would be a reduction in that 0.8% fee that Wells Fargo pays to Bilt. So even a small reduction in that amount, because it's a recurring fee on so many accounts, could make a significant impact. Now let's take a look at a couple of options that would have a direct impact on us as cardholders. The first item would be a potential annual fee with maybe an annual credit to go along with it. An annual fee being assigned to the Bilt credit card could help with the revenue aspect for Wells Fargo. Maybe a $95 annual fee. Now when we're talking about a potential credit, how about we take a look at the Wells Fargo Autograph Journey? It's also a $95 credit card, and it provides a $50 statement credit with $50 in minimum airline purchase. Now, nobody wants to see an annual fee on the Bilt credit card, but it would be understandable though. If you're a renter, it's probably going to be at least tolerable because you're still paying no fee on the processing to pay through your credit card and earn points. Now, as a non-renter, a potential $95 annual fee would be something that I'd have to consider to make sure if the Bilt card is still right for me. The second potential option would be to set a minimum amount required for each of the 5 required transactions in a billing cycle. Now this definitely could be a much more touchy option. Finding a balance of what that amount would be to generate non-rental revenue but not alienate your existing customers is a problem. Let's just say that it was a $10 minimum requirement per transaction. Now, this could be a disruption for renters. We hear a lot of cases where people are trying to do the most they can to spend the least amount of money on each of those 5 transactions. And most likely they are renters. Now, as a non-renter, this $10 potential minimum wouldn't really impact me. It's mainly because I'm already going to spend money on the card, but I make sure I do it on rent day for my car insurance, my utilities, so a $10 minimum wouldn't have any problem. 2 other potential options when it comes to this minimum transaction category is, 1, to change the frequency where people are doing it maybe once per week required, or to actually increase the minimum transactions from 5. I think either of those 2 options would be a major disruption, not just for renters, but even non-renters, and probably not a route that they want to go down. So tell me in the comment section, what do you think about a potential annual fee or a change to the minimum transaction structure? How it would impact you if you're already a cardholder, and if you're not a cardholder, does that make you consider not getting the Bilt credit card? So how about going forward? Well, 2 things we need to keep in mind. One is that this contract's running through 2029. And because of that, there's really no reason for any kind of panic, and there's also no reason to consider that your points are at risk. The second reason is Bilt is not having any problems. They are laughing all the way to the bank. Bilt is valued at $3 billion. And when this contract ends, it will be very difficult for Wells Fargo to walk away. They have sunk so much money into this project that failure to continue is going to have a significant impact on them recovering the money that they've put in, let alone the profits that they expected to see. So if you're a renter, the most likely near-term issues will be a potential annual fee or a change to the minimum transaction structure. If you're a renter and you don't already use the Bilt credit card on rent day, I would suggest considering looking at that possibility, because that would address the situation of the minimum transaction issue, as well as a very competitive return is likely in the case of paying for utilities or car insurance like I do. Now, if you're a non-renter like me, I'm going to be looking at the possibility of them charging an annual fee, but I'm also going to be looking at these rent days to see if we see additional transfer bonuses in the future. Now, while we don't know who actually pays for these transfer bonuses, and especially the larger ones we were seeing at times on rent day, it is something that I'm still going to be paying attention to see if somebody looks to reduce their expenses by having fewer days of that. Now, whether you're a renter or a non-renter, if you're a person that doesn't have points accumulating in any other ecosystem like Chase or Citi or Wells Fargo or Capital One, and you're only in Bilt, I would suggest considering diversifying your points a little bit. Diversification is always a good thing. There are a number of reasons why the Bilt credit card was on my list of the only 6 credit cards you need in 2024, and none of those reasons have changed. It is a great card and one that renters and non-renters should consider. If you want to learn more about the Bilt card as well as other credit cards that may be excellent options for you, please look at this and I'm sure it'll be beneficial.